The fresh body was narrowly avoided by the stampeding townsfolk, personal blades and staves drawn while rushing to hunt the quarry which had strolled into their territory and slaughtered one of their own. Only two remained behind, a man and an elven librarian sporting an imp on her shoulder. Amazed and confused, the man turned to the elf quizzically.
I have countless questions.
The librarian eyed the man tentatively.
I only have a few answers. Go ahead, newcomer, but make it quick.
The man, scratching the back of his head, blinked. His eyes were stuck on the librarian's ears and had been since first seeing her. The man shook his head, making eye contact at last.
Sorry, not used to seeing elves. First of all, what was that thing? Why did everyone freak out over it?
That's what is known as a petch.
The librarian sighed, shaking her head and ignoring the former comment.
They're very territorial entities, so people probably thought it would attack. I have to admit, even I am shocked that it sat down and read, not to mention the fact that it actually spoke.
Her eyes couldn't maintain eye contact for very long, constantly scanning the room. The man, now confused, cocked his head.
But why chase it down then? If it's dangerous...
The librarian chuckled nervously, somewhat distracted by her inspection of the nearest bookshelves.
Simple. Around these parts, the only real hope for survival is in numbers. If even one other petch was with that one, they could have murdered us all. I can also tell you aren't from around here.
Turning to face him briefly, she pointed to his side, dagger snugly packed into his belt.
If you were from around here, you would have that at the ready constantly.
The man laughed nervously, unlatching the pouch with a single, deft hand swipe. The librarian chuckled again before turning back around to scavenge beneath the tables for evidence of other monstrosities hiding.
You must be from the wealthier lands, or I wouldn't need to point that out. Regardless, I recommend you steer clear of that thing.
Even mentioning the entity she'd seen made her shudder, briefly glancing back at the body. The man looked quite pensive at this.
He didn't seem to be a threat, though. Maybe he was just scared? He did speak and read, after all. Maybe he's an intelligent peck.
The librarian shook her head, her imp mimicking her actions.
Sir, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but petch are never just scared or intelligent. They're vicious. They're deadly, and they're unforgiving. It's best for us to attack any and every one of those beasts we discover as a working unit. Else, they may reproduce and ravage our homes.
The man, still confused, asked,
Then why aren't you out there with them, ma'am?
Simple,
she responded, a small wisp of black flames licking over her hand momentarily to illuminate the area beneath the benches.
I'm staying behind to finish the job if he comes back here.
She never stopped looking around the building, scanning for other threats constantly. Looking worried, the man watched the crowd in the distance swarm after the peck, drawing weapons from unsecure belts and back straps.
But if that one is intelligent, despite what you claim, why treat it like a beast?
The librarian stiffened at this. She hadn't expected such a response, but quickly straightened herself out, brushing off her robes and straightening her belt.
That simply isn't possible. Petch are beasts meant to be hunted. It's as simple as that.
She took a single glance at the book the Peck was reading, A Beginner's Guide to Magical Classes, and picked it up disgustedly with 2 fingers. She looked between the book and the guard's body and, after a nod to the book, her imp took a deep breath and spewed similar black flames as the ones its master used, incinerating the book in seconds. The librarian let ashes flutter to the ground and turned to face the man, who was taken aback at the blatant disrespect towards the Peck.
No more questions, newcomer. Join the crowd or leave. And if you think that monster should be left alone, I highly recommend the latter.
With a graceful swishing of her robe, she turned and walked out of the library to inspect the surrounding buildings. The man looked back at the crowd, mere specks on the horizon now. The only thing he could do was wonder just how ruthless the mob would be. He silently prayed for the Peck, holy symbol in hand, before walking the opposite direction of the crowd and out of the town. His goal was never to create bloodshed. He merely wanted the guards to stop touching and pulling on him, to keep him alive. He hated seeing the blood splatter, The look of sheer horror and rage sported by the officer. He loathed the taste of iron in his mouth and couldn't stop the ringing in his ears. He hunkered down within some empty nearby stables, holding himself and attempting to control the shaking. The all-too-familiar shouts and jeers resounded through the wooden edifice, and Cog held his hands over his ears. Closing his eyes only shook him to his core as he visualized the bloodied man on the ground in vivid detail, exposed muscle and all. His eyes burst open as the crowd passed close by, and he let out a quiet sigh after their voices faded. He remained in those stables until the sun crested over the sky, and he shakily stood. He thoroughly and silently inspected all the corners of the stables and saw no other individuals. His chest was tight, his muscles were tensed, and his mind was racing. He felt guilt, intense guilt, for what he'd done, and he clutched his head and his heart simultaneously, reeling at the sudden emotional burden placed within his mind. Violence like that was not okay. It was bad. It was not what he'd wanted. Cog shook his head vigorously, trying to get himself to think clearly. His gut told him to chase the group and attack them, but he refused to move from the spot. He refused to cause more pain. He felt tears stream down his face before he decided to grit his teeth and stand, refuting the events that transpired just moments ago. He couldn't think about them now, despite the glazed eyes of the soldier looking into nothing engraved into his mind. He slowly and tentatively shuffled around the stable, trying to find a safe and secretive exit. Every step brought him new fear, and every second dawned a new ramification for his actions within his mind. His breaths became shaky, and his body trembled. His eyes darted around in a vain attempt to find something, anything to fix what he had done. After what felt like hours, his gaze finally fell upon a small, rotting patch of wood in a corner of the stables. He could easily break it and crawl into the nearby woodlands. But what then? He would be stuck running, and if he was discovered by the mob again, he shivered at the implications invading his mind. The things those villagers would do to him. He pushed the thoughts rapidly out of his mind the best he could and worked at quietly knocking out the rotten planks near the floor. He could figure out what to do once he was safely away from this place. After breaking through a solid amount of wood, something popped out of the planks he was ripping apart. It immediately caught Cog's eye and he instinctively reached for it, but paused just before he allowed himself to pick it up. His instincts were what made him hurt, what made him get hurt. He had to fight them here and now. He had to physically pull his arm away from the shiny object and simply observed it first. When he saw what it was, he laughed aloud. It was an old, rusted nail that barely had any luster left. He turned around with a smile, shaking his head, and finished the woodworking project, turning back to the nail far more than he'd like to admit at frequent intervals. The exit, however, was finally completed. Free to go at his leisure, Cog decided it best to learn how to fight his instincts here and now. It would let him help instead of hurt others, and it could even help him shake some of the guilt by fixing a part of the issue he had caused. Cog glared at the nail, attempting to scour any and every ounce of temptation from his mind.
I am better than this. I do not need this. I am strong. I can do this.
He chanted these words within his mind, bolstering his resolve while battling his instincts. He maintained sight on the worthless but mildly sparkling sliver of metal, even while his eyesight began to blur. He was instantly snapped out of his trance suddenly, however, when a hand dragged him through the exit he had broken for himself. A familiar hand.
"Oh, I found the bleeding bastard righty!"
The guard bellowed to the distant crowd. Cog hadn't heard any of them return. Did this guard ever even pass him by? He cursed himself under his breath for not thinking ahead further, struggling to escape the grip of the guard who was smirking while keeping his hostage at arm's length.
"You gonna bite off me arm like you did my mate, you wee share?"
The guard chuckled, shaking Cog more than vigorously. This inevitably slowed his struggles, and the guard simply laughed harder.
"Oh, I reckon you's had plenty of fighting you back in the town, didn't you? Quite the shame your bravado went out the window, huh?
Putting far more effort into his writhing, Cog managed to get the guard to release him by twisting his arm a bit under the Peck's weight. The guard grunted and recoiled his hand, rubbing his wrist and glaring at the Peck.
You little bastard! I'll cut off your fat head for your transgressions, resisting arrest and attacking an officer!
As he spoke, the crowd began to surround Cog, and before he could bolt from the scene, the guard pulled out his pike and drove it into the ground in front of the Peck.
And just where do you think you're going?
The guard rumbled, a more serious look on his face. His handlebar mustache was poorly paired with a goatee, and his large stature and malachite-tinted skin betrayed his identity as a half-orc.
If you're in such a hurry to get out of here, then I reckon you all will pay for your crimes up front, eh?
The guard took a fighting stance, surrounded by a tightly packed group of townsfolk, ranging from scared to bloodthirsty, and Cog felt himself choke up. This wasn't right. This wasn't what he'd wanted. It was, however, what he'd gotten. His instincts told him to stand and fight, and before he was able to come up with any peaceful way to defuse the situation, yet again fighting what his gut told him, he was caught in the shoulder with the butt end of the pike. It was capped with a brutal spike on the bottom which dug into his skin and felt as though the unexpected impact shook his very core. He couldn't think here, save for keeping the harm done to the guard to a minimum. This fight was inevitable, and Cog loathed it. His analysis was abruptly interrupted by the guard.
Course, only way you'll be leaving is in a body bag, you thieving monstrosity!
The guard spun his pike around and aimed for Cog's other shoulder, missing quite narrowly due to an impromptu dodge. The guard seemed taken aback. Such a fluid action was unnatural for a beast. But he didn't stay surprised. The people said it spoke, so it clearly had more abilities than a normal Peck. Frankly, however, the guard wouldn't care if the thing invented the Fountain of Youth. All he cared about was righteous vengeance for his fallen comrade. He shifted his helmet with a smirk, and he easily avoided a meek punch thrown by Cog, who was having trouble bringing himself to fight.
Oi, that all you got, you fucking jackass? Me nan hits harder than that!
He spun his pike in his hands not only to show off, but also to add momentum to his next swing, which swiped a gash through Cog's shirt and across his abdomen. Cog reeled back with pain, grasping at the wound and coughing.
Please, I didn't. Shut up!
Screamed the guard, swiping his pike's bottom across Cog's face and sending the Peck reeling with another gouge taken out of his flesh.
I don't want no excuses out of ya. I want to get your head mounted on my pike for killing my mate, freak!
The last word hit Cog especially hard, but he was unsure why. He had no time to respond before another pike swipe, this time under his legs, knocked him onto his rear. The guard's pike arced across the sky and implanted itself into the earth, kicking up dirt and pebbles as Cog barely managed to withdraw his feet in time. The guard's eyes were wide now and his teeth were gritted. Cog felt another massive pang of guilt. He had done this to the man. He had made this guard so upset because he had taken a life. He did wrong, and he was trying to avoid paying for it. Cog closed his eyes and braced for the next blow, which was luckily with the spike's butt end again. It sent the Peck careening backwards and into the stable wall, leaving a sizable indent. The guard stopped for a moment, realizing Cog was no longer trying to fight back and was now merely slumped against the stable wall. The half-orc's face darkened, and he threw his pike aside. He lifted his hands into a boxing position.
Well, if you're not gonna fight back, you little beast, I'll just beat the ever-loving shit out of yous with my bare hands!
When Cog opened his eyes, it was only for a moment, just long enough to see the guard's fist, and he instantly closed them again upon impact. The punch resounded against the stables, and Cog felt the building slightly sway.
Oi, say something, you fucking ass! I say I'm gonna kill you with my bare hands, and all you got in your gaping maw is silence? Speak!
Cog took a shaky breath, meeting the eyes of the guard. One of the Peck's eyes swollen for the most recent impact, the guard noted proudly, and suddenly, the guard understood. Somehow, understanding Cog's side was the straw that broke the camel's back. The guard seethed with rage.
You don't want to speak because you're thinking you're guilty as all hell, eh? You know what your greedy ass done, don't ya? Well, give me something, you bastard. It ain't no fun if you don't scream a little bit.
The guard smashed a foot into the Peck's gut, shattering the stable wall behind him and sending him careening into the next one. Cog simply lifted a hand, inspecting it, as he thought he was shaking. He felt a tear roll down his cheek and blood drip from his mouth. This man was not good. This man was violent. Was it okay to fight back? Was it alright if he didn't kill the guard? Wiping the blood and tear on his rags, Cog eyed the guard, whose aggression was well beyond a visible boiling point. His wild eyes, tooth-grinding grin, and tense posture were beyond enough indication of that. Cog stood up, and though strained as his motions were, he approached the guard, hands raised in the air.
I don't wanna fight,
Cog muttered. He received another punch for this that rattled his teeth, but he stood strong in place. The guard looked further irritated by this.
I don't want to kill.
This earned him a ferocious punch that folded him over the guard's fist, a mixture of blood and spit splashing from Cog's mouth. After regaining his composure, the guard chuckled viciously.
Then what you gotta say about murdering my best mate, you fucking hypocritical freak?
Cog stood silent and took another blow from the guard, this time receiving a kick to the chest. The wind was knocked out of him, but the guard gave him a moment to speak and catch his breath afterwards.
I was gonna be killed. You said so. I was scared. I attacked.
The guard halted at this, eyes squinting and preparing another punch. Cog attempted to continue.
It was instinct. I'm trying to fix.
He was interrupted by a massive blow, harder than any he'd taken to date, and the guard bellowed a guttural yell as he threw it, as Cog lay crumpled, clutching his stomach and beginning to black out. The guard stomped his foot in a fit of anger.
You're fucking excuses! You're motherfucking excuses! I'm sick of them! You're nothing but a fucking animal that needs to be put down!
The guard smashed his foot on Cog's head, causing the Peck to grunt in pain, feeling his eardrum rupture from the impact.
So get fucking put down, you bastard!
The guard stomped on him again. Cog cried out in pain, feeling his shoulder blade give under the force. Something in him snapped, and he launched a kick to the back of the guard's leg, just behind his knee, using his other leg to twist him into a standing position. The guard's leg buckled, and Cog leapt away from him, slowly straightening to his full height. The guard's face lit up with a sadistic grin as he turned to face the Peck.
So you do got some fighting, you little beastie!
The guard cackled, standing up. The crowd remained silent as they had throughout this endeavor, and Cog took a shaky breath.
Good! Now I can see you suffer for your damned excuses!
The guard bellowed once more, launching a ferocious right hook at Cog. With a blur of movement, the guard found his fist gliding through air, before feeling a massive impact in his gut. Cog stood, fist outstretched and teeth gritted, forcing an immense follow-through that sent the guard spiraling across the makeshift battlefield. Blood dripped from his mouth as he sat up, and when he saw the red substance dribble onto his hand, the guard clenched his fist and ran wildly towards Cog, who met him with another punch and duck, buckling the guard's knee and causing him to tumble behind the Peck. He screamed in rage and pounded his fists into the ground, glaring wild-eyed yet again at Cog. The Peck merely stood, teeth still gritted and shoulders hunched, fists held up to his face. Spitting blood out of his mouth, Cog heaved a sigh.
I don't want a fight.
The guard eyed the monster who had just flung him around. A combination of fear, rage, and sheer confusion burned into his face. Cog glared back at the guard.
But I won't sit and die.
Oh boy, that was a trip. I hope you guys really enjoyed that. I worked really hard on this, as did Puffin, aka Pokemon Fanfiction Novels, and Luster Purge Pink, or just Pink. You can find their links in the description down below. They were the voices of the man and woman respectively at the beginning of this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Y'all are beautiful people. You guys are amazing. You should feel amazing, and we will see you in the next chapter. Goodbye!